Star Trek Voyager faces some of the most cunning and cruel villains in the galaxy. In this live stream, we're going to count down the top 10 most dangerous villains the Voyager crew faces during their 7-year pilgrimage back to Earth. Drop your favorites in the chat and let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we are talking about the best villains on Star Trek Voyager, which, by the way, is a pretty hard list to cull. I started with, I think, 32 or 33 villains that I thought were really awesome. So that's not even all the villains. That's just all the villains I thought were really awesome. And then I narrowed it down to like 15. But then I had to pick 10, and that was really hard. But I managed to narrow it down to 10 and a couple of honorable mentions that I think are really, really great villains for the show. And the way I narrowed down the 10 was I tried to focus on villains that primarily affect the entire crew. So I took out the psychopathic serial killing hologram, for example, who I thought was an excellent villain, but was really mostly a danger to B'Elanna and maybe the Doctor. And I just try to focus on whatever big villains really were going to be a problem for the entire crew or the entire ship. So that's how I narrowed it down. But even with that, there were still quite a few. So let's start with the first villain. Oh, by the way, a couple things. There are timestamps below. So if you're watching live, there aren't. But if you're watching on the replay, which is most of you, there's timestamps below so you can jump to the next episode at any time. Okay, let's get started with the first episode or with the first set of villains on the list. That's another difference. This is not going to be like episodic. This is going to be based on villains. And some villains have an arc over multiple episodes. First couple don't, though. So this first villain is the Think Tank. So the Think Tank is a mysterious collection of problem solvers who sick bounty hunters on Voyager to manipulate them into giving them 7 of 9. I freaking love this episode. Like, I can't even. First of all, Jason Alexander, like, so fun in this role. But what I love about this is because this episode is all about problem solving and solving puzzles. And what does that look like? And so we're first made to think that these bounty hunters are coming against the Voyager crew for who knows what reason, because they have made a plethora of enemies at this point, right? So there could be all kinds of reasons why somebody wants to come against the Voyager crew. And the Think Tank shows up with the solution. Like, oh, the solution's so simple. We can help you. It's so easy. It sounds kind of scammy from the start, right? Because they don't tell them what the solution is. They're just like, it's easy. It's easy. We do this all the time. We solve all kinds of problems. So just trust us and we will solve this for you. So Janeway's like, okay, I feel like this comes at a price. So what exactly is the price? And he's like, oh, just whatever you have that's rare, give me a list of the things you have on board. And he tells her all kinds of things like, oh, I want this recipe for this soup, or, this artifact that Chakotay has from Earth or whatever. And then the last thing on his list is 7 of 9. And Janeway's like, you must be out of your ever-loving mind. Like, I will happily give you soup recipes all day long, but I'm not going to barter with members of my crew. And he's like, well, it's either give us 7 of 9 or let your entire ship be destroyed by these bounty hunters who keep multiplying, by the way, because they're apparently bounty hunters with high work ethic. Okay. So they will not come back empty-handed from any kind of bounty. So every time Voyager eludes them or escapes or whatever, they just keep calling in more and more and more ships. Eventually, Voyager is going to be caught. So in the end, 7 of 9, it's kind of up to her because she's feeling like, okay, I'm the payment they require. It's fine. Like, I will leave so that way you guys can live. And Janeway's like, no, we're getting out of this one way or another. With or without the Think Tank's help, we're getting out of this problem. It's up to you to decide. Do you want to go with them? Because as a Borg, you're always trying to explore, perfection and getting more knowledge. And that's what this group's about. So if this is something you're interested in for your personal growth, by all means do it. And 7 is like, I am interested in that, but not the way that they do it. Because these people are basically blackmailers, which is why they are the lowest on the list, because they are a danger to the entire crew, but not directly, right? They don't really have any weapons on their little spaceship or whatever their ship is. They don't have any weapons. They're not a physical threat, but they're a threat because of the strings they can pull. As soon as the bounty hunters discover that the Think Tank is behind all of this, the bounty hunters are like, wait a minute, we don't want to work for them because there's a bounty on their heads. Imagine the bounty we could make on them, because everyone in this whole quadrant hates them because of how they do business, how they're such blackmailers. So Turns out the solution was really simple. Pull them out of subspace so that the bounty hunters could go after them and let Voyager go free. But anyways, I put them on the list because even though they're not a threat directly, they were a major threat indirectly. And had Janeway not discovered this ruse, the ship could have totally been destroyed easily. I mean, eventually one of those ships was going to get a lucky shot, right? I think at some point they were hiding in the nebula or something classic. But the other thing about the nebulas is there's always gas or whatever that's going to get into the ship or corrode the hull or something. You can't hide in there forever. So at some point they were going to get got. However, Janeway figured it out, turned the tables, and they got free. These are excellent villains, you know, especially since in the beginning, that first scene, we see this alien come to their ship and they're saying like, oh, thanks so much for whatever they did for their planet, stopping all the earthquakes so that we could survive or whatever. And then he's like, but we just can't pay you as much as we said because we really need a lot of those resources to rebuild our planet or whatever. And the alien guy is just kind of like, okay, well, then we'll just reverse everything we did and have your planet collapse. And he's like, on second thought, we'll give you everything you need, right? So it's like, we see they're bad guys in the beginning, but they're kind of tricky bad guys. You know, they're kind of subtle bad guys. We almost think they're good guys at first. Janeway's the only one who's not fooled about them being good guys at any point in the process. I mean, she doesn't think they are, she doesn't know how bad they are until later on in the episode. She knows they're not, but she knows they're not totally like upfront with things. And she asks him point blank, like, if you help people solve problems and you help people with conflicts, do you create weapons and, you know, stuff to end conflicts? And he's like, yeah, we do. We just don't create weapons of mass destruction. You know, we'll make a super cool smart gun, but we won't make a super cool smart nuke. That's where we draw the line. And she's like, ugh, that's a little shady, but we do need some help, right? So Janeway was onto them from the beginning. Such a fun episode. Oh, love it so much. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we'll hit the next villain on the list. Hello to everybody watching live. Hello to everyone watching on the replay. When Grace says, I'll spoil number one. It's Groppler Zorn. Guess you'll have to wait and find out. No, it's not Groppler Zorn. I know he wasn't on Voyager, but his threat persists. I love that. Nadia says, oh, that hologram was crazy scary. Anyways, my favorite is Seska. I also love Species 8472 and the Hirogen and that dude who tried to trick Janeway into giving up the refugees. Yeah, that guy, Kajik from the Devore. Yeah, that was a great episode. Hi, Carlos. I'm glad you're here. Okay, yeah. PS2 Chipper says they're ethical war profiteers. Exactly, ethical war profiteers. And they don't only do war and conflict, but you can imagine that's probably the primary type of problem they solve. Obviously, like global crises, whatever. But their whole power in being blackmailers is that they solve big problems. I mean, sometimes they say they solve small problems, like, oh, finding this child's missing pet, right? They're like, oh, we solve all kinds of problems. But considering the fact that the payment they want is typically very high, it seems to be something that hurts to give that payment. It's never something just like really simple. That shows me that they have a little bit of a, I don't know, just something like they have a streak in them that's just kind of like cruel. That's just mean, you know? Yeah, when Grace says Counterpoint is so good. I love that it even comes back to play in Prodigy. I know. That's coming up pretty soon because Counterpoint is definitely on this list. Okay, the next villain on the list are the evil scientists, who I don't know if they have a name. But these scientists come from season 4, episode 7, Scientific Method. Unscrupulous cloaked aliens subject the entire crew to a series of invasive experiments. After a crewman dies, Janeway decides to crush the ship between a pair of pulsars rather than let the experiments continue. This is another one of my favorite episodes. Okay, I say that all the time about Voyager. There's a lot of favorite episodes, but I freaking love this episode. I love so many things about this episode. These scientists are awful. And I am a trained scientist. So watching it, I feel like appalled on behalf of all science. But I understand what they're saying, right? Is that if you're doing any kind of science that uses subjects that are living, animals, people, doesn't matter, you know, there are moral issues to take into account. Now, in this case, in this episode, these scientists are doing all of these experiments on the crew without the crew knowing. So all these weird things are happening. And when the crew kind of starts to figure out that something weird is afoot, like the doctor is scanning, I think, Chakotay's DNA and Neelix's DNA, because they both had these weird genetic things happen. They've both gotten like really old really fast and all this weird stuff. He finds these little tags on their DNA. And he's like, what is this? So he brings in B'Elanna and he's like, this looks like something mechanical or engineering or something, where their actual DNA is being tagged, like, you know, like subject number 003 or whatever, like they're being tagged at the DNA level. And so when B'Elanna starts to take a look, all of a sudden she becomes incapacitated. And then the doctor's program gets deleted, or so they think, but he quickly transfers himself to the holodeck and he like sneaks away. Point is, these aliens are cloaked, so they're pretty much invisible, and they're going around wreaking havoc on the ship, and nobody knows that it's happening because you can't see them. So people know things are going on. People know things are going wrong. People know people's DNA is getting changed. Nobody knows why. And when someone gets a little close to the solution, they get incapacitated. The doctor modifies Seven's implants so that she can actually see them. And then of course, Seven brings them to the attention of everybody and is like, these are the bad guys. They're the ones who've been messing with us this whole time. But it's like, what are you going to do? Because everything that Janeway and crew tries to do to get these evil scientists to either be visible, get off the ship, like anything they do to try to defend themselves is pointless, because these people have been on the ship long enough to learn all of the security codes, all the command codes, because they're literally looking over people's shoulders while they're pushing in their passwords, right? So these aliens are so nefarious. They're sneaky, they're tricky, you don't even know they're there. And then when Janeway, you know, Seven catches one and they put her in the brig, and Janeway's talking to her, and she's just like, well, you know, some sacrifices have to be made. And by sacrifices, I mean all of you. You know, she's just like, I don't know what to tell you. Whatever happens to you guys will eventually somehow perhaps help my people in the future. So I feel like it's worth it. And by the way, there's nothing you can do about it. Good thing they happen to be near these pulsars. And Janeway basically plays a game of chicken, which is the Jane way. She's like, if I don't have my way, we're blowing this whole thing up. So she plays chicken, and then the two scientist ships try to disengage and run away because they realize she's totally serious. One of them does get away, the other one blows up, and we are so happy for that because that's what they get. And Janeway et al. Are saved. And presumably, now that they know how to detect this technology, they can protect the ship from this kind of incursion in the future, from this at least specific species. These bad guys are so bad. Like, these villains are so clever. Typically, when we have villains, I mean, we have a range of villains in the Star Trek universe, right? We have everybody from Khan to the Borg to Lore. You know, we have these levels, but then we also have like the Pakleds, or like Q, or, you know, we have all these different levels of villains. Some are silly. You know, we have the Ferengi, who end up not being villains, thankfully, because that was nonsense in TNG and so much better in Deep Space Nine. So we have a lot of like layers and flavors of villains. But what I really like about these villains is the fact that they don't think they're doing anything wrong, which is kind of a theme with a lot of the villains on this list. But the fact that they're just like, yeah, like, you're going to die and, you know, be tortured and suffer, but it's for the greater good. You know what I mean? I mean, they're just like, nothing passes their they're not trying to be malicious, right? And I think that's what makes them interesting. I think that's also what makes the Borg interesting, is that they're not trying to be malicious. They're just kind of doing what they do. And you might get assimilated while they do what they do, you know, but it's not personal, versus like the Romulans or the Cardassians, where it is totally personal. Like, it is very personal. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. And I think these villains are really noteworthy. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we will hit the next set of villains on the list. Nadia says, I forgot about these guys. Yeah, those scientists were awful. And I don't think we ever know or we might, and I might forget. If you know, let me know in the chat, but I don't remember the name of these scientists being actually said, or these aliens actually being said. Wingrace says, Janeway pulls the Nagilum solution on steroids. And Nadia says, Janeway is always one Janeway Alpha Pi authorization code away from blowing up Voyager. Yes, this line. Oh, I love this line by Janeway. I don't respond well to threats. I love it. I love it. This episode too, the other, like, this is just like fangirling over Janeway, but this episode specifically, right before she flies into the pulsars, if you remember, there is a, when the crewman dies, it's really dramatic. They die on the bridge, and like I I think their DNA turns into polymer, and you can see all their veins like all over their face. And she's like on the ground shaking and whatever. And the doctor's there and hypo spraying away and, doing chest compressions. And Janeway's like trying to breathe, do rescue breathing. And she dies. And it's like really traumatic because everybody's like, oh no, and then that's the point where she realizes we can't win this fight the way we've been trying to. And she takes the helm herself. She's like, move over, Tom Paris. And she's like, that's it. And she's like, I'm piloting the ship right into those pulsars. And I just love the whole scene. I love it because the scientist like appears, decloaks or whatever. And it's just like, if you keep going, we're going to kill you all. And she's like, good luck flying the ship out of the pulsars then without us, because even with us, you've got what, like a 1 in 20 chance or whatever. And it's just so great. It's just so great. I love it when people think they can intimidate Janeway and bully her. I just love it when they think that. And I love it when she corrects their flawed thinking. It's just beautiful. Yeah. DJ Knight says, yeah, that's been a dramatic episode. Yes, it was very dramatic, but so good. Oh, so good. Okay, the next set of villains on the list are the Nyrians. And these aliens come from season 3, episode 24, Displaced. One by one, Voyager's crew is replaced by the Nyrians, who seem to be just as confused about the whole situation as everybody else. Turns out, however, this is exactly how they take over ships, space stations, and whole planets. They kidnap people and put them into a holodeck, zoo-like prison to live out the rest of their days, presumably. This plan is pretty ridiculous. Well, the plan actually works. Their plan of switching places is truly effective. When they show up on the ship, it's like their leader is the first one to show up. And he's all like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. And B'Elanna and Tom find him in a hallway and they're like, this is so weird. They take him to sick bay. They're like, we don't know what's going on. He doesn't know where he the last thing he remembers is being on his home planet, like 10 light years away or something like that. And at this point, they don't realize that people are being swapped. They know that Nyrians are showing up, but they don't realize that people are being swapped. And then little by little, they're like, wait a minute, every time a Nyrian comes, someone else leaves. And at this point, I don't even remember how many there are at this point. Let's say there's 20 or something. And Janeway tells Chakotay, put them all where I can see them. Keep them all in the cargo bay in one spot and put a guard on the door. And Chakotay's like, I mean, they haven't done anything aggressive. Don't you think that's a little bit much? And Janeway's like, I don't care how this looks. I've had a knot in my stomach since that first Nyrian appeared. And everything that's going on is not making me feel better. And at this rate, our entire crew will be replaced in however long she says, like 3 hours or whatever she says, 24 hours, whatever she says. And I love that. I love that Janeway was like clever enough to know that this was some big ruse, because watching the episode, and I remember watching the episode and being like, why does she think there's something fishy about this? Like, they don't know what's going on either. Of course they know what's going on. They knew all along. They were the bad guys. They were Agatha all along, these Nyrians. And so that part of their plan, I think, is pretty genius. The part of their plan that I think is less genius is the whole kidnapping people and then keeping them in the zoo prison forever. Because, like, think about it. Now you have to feed them forever and like take care of their medical needs, presumably, or something. Or maybe the holodeck does that. I don't know. And thankfully the Voyager crew has their doctor. But you know what I mean? Like, if you're stealing a ship by replacing all of the crew, now you have to care for the crew forever. And I'm not saying a better idea would be to kill the crew or anything, but I just think, like, since they're going around from ship to ship to ship, just like kidnapping everybody, they're keeping them in this huge ship that's a big prison. It's just like, aren't you eventually going to run out of space with this? Or like, what's the plan? Is the plan that your generations from now will still be caring for these random people in all these little prisons? And like, also, aren't there homeworlds looking for them or something? Maybe not. Maybe because space is dangerous and they just think the ships have been lost. But what happens if that ship runs into like another ship down the road that's like, hey, that's the CSV, whatever, and they hail them and it's a bunch of Nyrians on the ship? I don't know. I feel like this plan has flaws, but the episode is fantastic. I really enjoy this episode. One of the fun things about it, I removed the wrong thing. One of the fun things about it is when they put the Nyrians into their own prison, and they take the two like people, the head and like the second in command, and they put them into one of their little holodeck rooms in the prison. And the Nyrians are always too cold, so they put them in like the snowy place. And Janeway's basically like, you could let us go or you could stay here forever. your choice. And they're so cold and miserable. And they're like, we couldn't possibly be kept in captivity. That's awful. And you're like, really? Really? How many hundreds of people are in this ship prison? And so of course they give in because they better. And Janeway and crew takes all of them and puts them into their own prison and then contacts the worlds of all of these homeworlds who have been in prison so that way they can go home. But also, they need to face justice. Now, how's that going to work? Because now it's like 25 justice systems they need to face. I don't know. Maybe they'll just put them all back in the freezing room and just like call it a day. I don't know. Because we don't get a where are they now with them. However, this episode's really great. And also these villains are really great because similar to the last two villains, they're sneaky. They don't even seem like villains. And I think that's kind of one side of the coin. Like there's the villains that are just obvious villains and they're in your face and they're bold about it. And they're so powerful and scary that, you just hope you get away alive or you hope that you can match their firepower or something like that. I'm thinking of like every time the Romulan ships decloak and there's like 2 Romulan ships to 1, to the Enterprise or something. And you're like, ooh, this is bad. Like that's just like a moment where you're being overpowered. But in cases like this, because they're sneaky, you're kind of like, are they even bad guys? And by the time you figure it out, it's far too late to do anything about it. By the time you figure out there's something wrong. Also, they couldn't figure out how to block this technology. It was B'Elanna who discovered that it was a type of technology. And she was the one who could have potentially maybe figured out how to block it if she had enough time. However, the Nyrians kept steering her wrong on purpose. They kept being like, it must be a wormhole. It must be this. It must be that. So that way she didn't look in the right direction. And as soon as she stumbled upon it and was like, wait, this doesn't look natural at all. This looks artificial. And she was talking to one of the Nyrian scientists about it. As soon as he realized that, he knocks out one of the people standing nearby and like moves her up on the list and beams her out immediately using the technology. So the one person who could have maybe figured it out is taken out, and maybe she should have been taken out earlier, but it's taken out. And so like, I don't know. I think they're very clever villains, not as scary as some of the other villains on the list. The Nyrians really aren't scary at all, but they're effective. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we will go to the next villain on the list. Nadia says, the Nyrians were so duplicitous. I hated them. Also, their aversion to cold makes me happy because there ain't no way they will ever show up here in Canada. I know, they'll probably show up here down here in LA though, because it's rarely cold, except for now. I'm super cold, but regular humans probably aren't. DJ Knight says, Roxanne Biggs Dawson, we were swapped for those jerks. Roxanne Biggs Dawson is the actress who played B'Elanna, magnificently played B'Elanna. And yeah, they were jerks. And it took them a little while to realize that where they were was a holographic type prison. And what the Nyrians did, I don't know how they do this, but it's part of their technology as well. Before, like, they do some recon before they, hijack space station ships, what have you. And so they explored all the databases on Voyager to figure out what Earth was like, which makes me think that most of the creatures on Voyager can function in Earth-like climates. So they figured out what Earth was like, and then they made an Earth simulation for them to kind of live in forever and ever. But as Tuvok explored it, he was like, okay, what's weird about this little compound that we're in is that if we go too far to the left, there's sheer cliffs that are impassable. If we go too far to the right, there's mountains you can't climb. If we go too far straight, it's like waterfalls or whatever. And he was like, what are the odds that they would find a location on an actual planet that has natural barriers all the way around? Very unlikely. PS2 Chipper says, rules for thee, not for me. That is exactly the Nyrians. That is their tagline. Exactly. Wingrace says, really fun idea without a solid end game, thankfully for us all. Exactly. I'm not really sure what they were going for, like, in the end. But man, was this a good episode and such a interesting idea for a villain, right? And how they can bring their evil plans to bear. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really, I guess maybe it was power, but it wasn't so cut and dry. And DJ Knight says, let those jerks get what they deserve, which We don't know what exactly they get, but we do know they get some kind of justice because Janeway and crew make sure that all the home planets know exactly where to find them and they can handle it from here because Voyager has to be getting home now. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says solid episode. I totally agree. Okay, the next villain on the list is a singular villain, and the villain is Seska. So magnificent. So we first find out in season 1, episode 11, State of Flux, that Seska is not actually Bajoran, but instead she's a Cardassian spy who was trying to work against the Maquis. Now, at this point, she's colluding with the Kazon, which is how she gets found out. And I believe in that episode, let me know if I'm wrong in the chat, but I believe in that episode she is trying to frame Tom Paris or something like that. But really, it was Seska all along. So we find out that Seska's a spy. And then in season 2, episode 14, Alliances, Seska is like fully integrated with the Kazon at this point. She's given up all hope of like doing anything meaningful on Voyager. By the way, when they catch her in State of Flux, I don't know what they plan to do. Are they going to put her in the brig for the next 70 years? Probably not. But she escapes to a Kazon ship before they can do anything because she's like, oh, my cover's blown. You got to get me out of here. So in Alliances, she's fully integrated with the Kazon. She is married to Maj Kulla, and she's trying to broker some kind of peace with Janeway, right? So that way, like, she can at least ally herself with the strength that Voyager represents in the Delta Quadrant. But Maj Kulla tanks the negotiations because he says he's not going to let the negotiations be handled by a woman. So even though Seska set everything up, she's trying to make Kulla seem like he's in charge, but he doesn't like the fact that Janeway's in charge. Maybe he would prefer talking to Chakotay or something. It's really stupid. So Seska's like, I'm sure we can talk about that later. And Kulla's like, no, I'm setting the terms. And Janeway's like, you know what? This is a bad idea all along. I'm out. Right. And Seska's like, no, wait. But before they can hammer out any of the details anyway, the whole place gets bombed. The episode Alliances, if you haven't seen it in a while, highly recommend. It's very exciting. And you're like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And it's bombed by like another faction of Kazon because they're in some kind of civil war. And Janeway's just kind of like, you know what? I didn't really want to partner with you in the first place. And the only reason she did was because they were getting attacked constantly by the Kazon. So she was like, maybe if we align with like a few of the factions, we'll have some protection from the other factions and just like a little bit of peace on our way back home. But the talks totally fell apart. And Janeway was like, you know what? First thought was correct. Forget these Kazon, forget all of them. We're done. We're out. So goes on the way. Then we get to Basics, which is the end of season 2, the last episode of season 2, which I think is episode 26, and then the first episode of season 3. And so Seska and the Nistrum take over Voyager, and they put out the entire crew on the nearest M-class planet. So Voyager's like, so Seska's like, ha, I am now the queen of Voyager. She finally has the ship. And I guess her plan is to rule the Delta Quadrant. So I think it's pretty clear at this point. She has no hopes of returning back to the Alpha Quadrant. She's kind of planted her flag. She's going to stick with the Kazon. She's going to stay here in the Delta Quadrant. But if she's going to be stuck here, she's going to be in charge of something. And that's what I like about Seska. She's ambitious. She's driven. She's smart. She's another like villain that I feel like is so clever. She did not have to be super evil, but she just like couldn't get her way. And so she went to extremes to get it, which I understand that. But in the beginning, what she really wanted was to get home faster. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing villainous about that. And she thought pairing with the Kazon was going to be helpful because they were a power in the quadrant and whatever, could give some allyship, could, so where she went wrong was her like sneaky nature. But that's because she's like a non-trustworthy person. She's an untrustworthy person. Like she lied about who she was. And when she was found out, she lied even more. And then instead of trying to work with Voyager, she tried to steal it. And then she tried to work with them, but then she just ended up stealing it because that didn't work out. Anyways, unfortunately, she does die in Basics Part 2 when Sutter, which is a whole nother story. That's another good like villain, not villain, because he definitely was a villain. He was a serial killer, but then Tuvok mind melded with him and fixed his brain. And then he was no longer a serial killer, but instead a gardener and a lover of orchids. Whatever. Anyways, in the end, he saves the ship. And he dies in the process, taking a whole bunch of Kazon with him, including Seska. So unfortunately, she does die in Basics Part 2. She ends up having a son who she thinks is Chakotay's, but is actually Kulla's. So when she dies, Kulla does take their son, and go back to his ship and do whatever Kulla was doing before he met Seska. But she comes back in Worst Case Scenario, which is season 3, episode 25. Episode I freaking love. Love this episode. I could watch it over and over, where she comes back in a holodeck program to take revenge on Tuvok. But Tom Paris happens to be there too. So she gets a twofer, and she tries to take revenge on both of them. And in the nick of time, Janeway rewrites the program to save the day, which is a great episode. And I just love the fact that even as a holodeck program, she's formidable. Like, I mean, the fact that she even wrote this program. And the funny thing is, the irony is in that program when she's talking to Tuvok, like when the thing's reactivated and Seska has them in prison, she says something to Tuvok about him being a traitor because he had created this holodeck program to train young Starfleet ensigns or Starfleet, personnel on what to do if the Maquis mutiny. So that's what it originally was. It was a training program because he was like, you can't trust the Maquis or whatever. So Seska found it and felt betrayed by Tuvok. So she rewrote the program so that it would kill him in revenge or something. And the irony is that she's a traitor and a spy. So how is she over here feeling some kind of way and trying to kill Tuvok for being a traitor and a spy? Anyways, Seska, amazing. So I'm going to check the chat before we go to the next villain on the list. That was just villain number 7. We got a lot more villains to cover in Star Trek Voyager. Okay. Let's see. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, Seska is a decent villain. Her boyfriend, Cullen, not so much. I would completely agree. Seska is an incredible villain. Maj Cullen is barely, he's like villain adjacent. Like, what is Cullen gonna, if he didn't have Seska? Because Seska has all these plans, because she's got that Cardassian training, right? She's got all these plots and plans. The only reason they captured Voyager is because of Seska's plotting. What would Cullen be without Seska? Like, what would he be doing? He wouldn't have even had that back in Alliances. He wouldn't have even had the thought to, unify some of the factions to try to strengthen their position. So yeah, he's definitely not the villain we want to highlight. And really none of the Kazon. Collectively, they might be something, but they're so fractured that they're not really a threat. DJ Knight says she's a royal pain in the neck, meaning Seska. Yeah, she is definitely a thorn in their side. She's like, if I can't go home, none of y'all are going home, which I think is just funny and kind of like the flip side of Janeway in that sense, right? Because Janeway is very much like my way or the highway. Apparently Seska is too. Nadia says, yes, Seska, baby. She is so amazing. I told Charisse today that if Seska had held out longer, she could have partnered with species 8472 and taken over the galaxy 1000%. So look at everything that Seska was able to do after partnering with the Kazon of all people. That's who she partnered with. No shame there, but she was able to really take them to new heights. She was able to get the armies together. I mean, she did a lot of stuff with the Kazon, who, were not the most organized factions in the whole galaxy. Imagine if she had partnered with species 8472, because they were clever, strong, devious, powerful, all the things. And then you blend that with Seska's knowledge and know-how. First of all, she would have absolutely gotten home to the Alpha Quadrant. Second of all, she could have partnered Cardassia, all of Cardassia with them, and they would have been unstoppable, which would have been terrifying. So thankfully for all of us, Seska did not partner with species 8472. Wingrace says, you were working for her. Seska was working for them. Was anyone on board that ship working for me? Poor Chakotay. I know. Chakotay, just his whole ship was full of traitors. Not B'Elanna. B'Elanna was like, she was in it to win it. But the cool thing about that scene where Chakotay is talking to Tuvok and is like, why was my crew full of traitors that I did not know were traitors? What the heck? Tuvok is like, oh, I didn't see that coming either. I totally didn't see that coming with Seska. That was a shock for me. And it made Chakotay feel better. He was like, okay, so it wasn't just me. I'm not just a terrible leader because there's all these spies on my crew. You guys were just really effective spies. Yeah. Poor Chakotay. Carlos says, did you say LA is your house? I've been watching the news in England and it has been showing it. Yes, I do live in LA. At the time of this recording, we just got over some really bad wildfires. We have wildfires every year, but we just got over some really bad wildfires. I don't know if got over is the right word, but there have been some really bad wildfires raging for the past several days, past week or so. at the time of this recording. And thankfully, I am totally safe. My home is totally safe. I'm close enough to get a lot of the ashes and smoke and stuff, but very far from those fires. So totally safe. But yeah, it's a thing. It shocked me that this news became international, because that hasn't happened before. I've had friends from other countries reaching out and being like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "How do you even know what's going on here? You're in Australia." So that's really crazy. But yes, I am well. You didn't say that in your chat, but I'm sure that was the next thing you were going to text is like, "Are you okay?" I'm okay. Thanks for checking in. Nadia says, yes, that was one of the best Chakotay lines ever. Oh, poor Chakotay. DJ Knight says, no, I think it's just funny that Seska has been doing bad things and or good things. So what do you mean bad things and or good things? I think it's funny Seska has been doing bad things and or good things. Well, Seska, I feel like when Seska was like, I just want to get home, I feel like that was not bad. I feel like that was appropriate. Then she added kind of like at any cost. And that's the line that Janeway wouldn't cross. She was like, no, it's not going to be at any cost. We have to have Starfleet morale and rules and all of that, which, okay. I'm actually fine with that, because if you see the episode Equinox, where we see that other Starfleet crew that was also stranded in the Delta Quadrant by the caretaker, we see that they did not follow all these moral rules and laws. They did try to get home by any means necessary, and it was horrible. Like horrible. They turned into awful people. There was a mutiny. They were being hunted by these aliens that they were slaughtering by the dozens. I mean, it was a nightmare when they didn't follow their principles. So like in that sense, yes, I'm like, yeah, follow the principles of, not slaughtering a bunch of aliens so that you can get home faster. However, I feel like there's a good middle ground, because the thing that Seska said in worst case scenario in that holodeck program is she was like, we're not going to be stopping and investigating every interesting nebula on the way home. We're going straight home. We're just going home. And I'm here for that. Like if I was on that ship, I get that Janeway's like, well, we're here anyways. So why not kind of explore while we're here? Starfleet doesn't know anything about the Delta Quadrant. We can kind of pick up information for our scientists on our way home. Like I get that on our way home, but the whole rerouting so we can investigate some interesting little mystery in space, I don't care about that. Like we need to be focused 100% on getting home as quickly as possible. Interesting nebula, lovely, wonderful, send a probe. Like, let's go. So I feel like Seska was kind of like, she had those moments where it's like, that makes sense. And then she had those moments where you're like, oh, girl, like, why are you so obsessed with Chakotay? Let it go. Let it go. He's cute, but you got to let that go. Okay, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, the best villain moment for Seska probably isn't even really in her worst case scenario. Oh, probably isn't even really her in worst case scenario. Yeah. But it is her though. Like, yeah, it's a hologram version of her, but it is her because she wrote that program and she wrote it to be her. You know what I mean? So like she was bringing herself into that role. Carla says, I like Seska. And DJ Knight says, I bet you do, which I don't know if that's to Carlos, but I also like Seska. I'm a big fan of Seska. I mean, she's like a terrible person, but such an interesting character, such a multi-layered character, which I really like. PS2 Chipper says she's like a snake that can still kill you after they die. She absolutely is. Wingrace says she's also sort of the main. She really is. She is the main threat in the episode Shattered, but she's not as villainous. In the episode Shattered, again, if you haven't seen that episode in a while, go watch it. It's one of my favorites as well because it's so good. The entire ship gets fractured into all these different time periods. So like engineering is in the time period of Displaced when Seska's in charge. But like, the bridge is in the time period where they just got sucked into the Delta Quadrant by the caretaker. And then like all these different parts of the ship are just in different timelines. And Seska is the only one who's like, so Chakotay's going around trying to bring everything back to his timeline. And when Seska figures out what he's doing, she's like, no, apparently at some point in the future, I lose the ship. That doesn't work for me. So you're going to bring everything into my timeline. And I'm going to run this, which is really smart because if you think about it, without Seska, there is no main villain for that episode. And that episode would not be as good and would not be as powerful. Because I love a good time loopy thing. And I love a good, jump through timelines episode. Love that. But without a main villain, this episode I think would have been a lot weaker because we would have been like, okay, so Chakotay goes through all these timelines. It would have been like Shades of Grey with Riker in TNG, where you're just like, okay, now it's a clip show. Like, what's the point? But to have that villain, you're like, oh, okay, they have a point, and Chakotay's trying to do something, and Seska's like opposing him, and it's Seska, so of course she's going to be really effective at it. Yeah, I totally agree. PS2 Chipper says the Kazon were useful idiots. Yeah, they did not paint the Kazon really like very strong. They kind of pulled a Ferengi, you know, because the Ferengi were not painted super strong in TNG either. Heretic says the Seska Kulla storyline gets even sillier when you think about how much trouble the Kazon gave Voyager in the early seasons. I don't know. You're right. And I don't know if Kulla, first of all, let's be clear, Seska's running the show. Kulla is the figurehead. But I don't know if Kulla equates Seska with Voyager, like Seska's one of them, or if Kulla's just like, oh no, Seska said this is a good idea, so I think we should do it. I think it was more like that, where I don't know, he said we should like take the ship, so maybe we should take the ship. I don't know. And then Heretic says in the later seasons, the Borg collective isn't even much of a problem. Yeah, they kind of like come and go. I'm definitely going to talk about the Borg. They have made the list. At first, I didn't want to because I'm like, of course the Borg are going to make the list because they always make the list. But then how could they not make the list about best villains when the Borg are incredible villains? Let's see. Yes, Carlos says, I would like to know what happens to Seska and Maj Kulla's son. Why didn't we see this boy in Prodigy? Huh? Star Trek? Why didn't we see him in Prodigy? That's where he should have shown up. Nadia said the Equinox crew should be included on this list. So I almost included them on this list. But then I was like, because they kind of are a threat. They are a threat to the entire ship. But I felt like there's some other aliens and groups that maybe I should focus on more. But they should have been an honorable mention. I don't think they are. Yeah, I'll throw them in too. Ooh, PS2 Chipper says Seska is a counter to Tasha Yar. That's interesting. That is an interesting thought. Okay, let's hit the next villain on the list. And this villain is the Devore Imperium. So this comes from season 5, episode 10, Counterpoint. Voyager secretly hides telepathic refugees called the Brinari who are hunted by the non-telepathic Devore. Kajik, a Devore inspector, claims to defect and offers his help, but tries to double-cross Janeway. She double-crosses him first, and then he lets them all pass safely through their space. This episode, which I'm saying for every episode, is one of my favorite episodes. I really love Counterpoint. First of all, I just love Janeway I just love Janeway having a companion. I just love that for her. Because, I don't know, she deserves it. So I love that for her. Unfortunately, it's this dude, but beggars can't be choosers, I guess. He seems really believable, though. He seems like he's changed and his heart is different, and he does not like what his people are doing and all of this stuff. But of course, he's just a big liar. Anyways, the reason why the Devore Imperium are on this list is because they are a huge threat to Voyager. Not just Voyager because they have telepathic crew members, and not just Voyager because they are in fact smuggling telepathic citizens out through the Devore space, but also they're a threat just because of how they are. These are basically like the Nazis of the Delta Quadrant. And so just because of who they are and how they are, they're a threat to Voyager. When they first see the ship, the first thing they want to do is impound the ship and take the whole and imprison the entire crew, because that's just kind of their thing. They just imprison everybody who doesn't agree with them or believe in what they believe in, or anyone who has telepathic abilities immediately needs to get imprisoned. And their whole thinking behind that is that telepaths have an unfair advantage over people who are not telepathic. And that's why they're criminals. It's because they can read your minds. And so Kajik was saying all the stuff of how could you ever trust them in a business deal? Or how could you ever trust them in anything when they can read all your thoughts and manipulate you? So the assumption is they're using their telepathy for evil, which ironically is exactly what the Devore would use telepathy for if they had that ability. Because clearly they're all terrible people. And they're living in this crazy police state where even if you said, well, hey guys, don't you think we're being a little bit extreme on this? Just because they're telepathic doesn't mean they're evil. You'd be imprisoned as a sympathizer, right? So it's what they're creating is this really toxic culture that is very much us versus them. And if you're not exactly like them, you're not worth anything. These people are awful. Kashyyyk, I think, is such a perfect example of them too. Because when we see his first, like his, I want to say first officer, but I don't really know their hierarchy. But when we see the guy who answers to him, that guy is very like by the book and by the rules, and we will impound this ship and we will arrest everybody. Like he's very, very by the book. Whereas Kashyyyk is more like casual and personable and all of that. So it would make you think that one is better than the other. But in fact, Kashyyyk is much more dangerous than the by the books person. That by the books person will show up on your ship. He'll be like, are you guys harboring anyone? Well, I feel like you are. You're all under arrest, right? Like he's just like what you see is what you get. Kashyyyk is the opposite. What you see is not what you get. He's such a tricky little thing, which I feel like makes him worse. But it's the entire Imperium that is number 6 on the list. The entire Imperium are dangerous to the entire Voyager crew, to their ship. I don't know how large their space is, but it's pretty big because I think they go through this space for weeks or something like that before they finally get to the other side of it. How do they define which areas of space are theirs? Who the heck knows? But thankfully, they finally get out. And in the end, the first in command or whatever is going to impound the ship because they've discovered that they were harboring all these Bernali. But the only reason they don't is because Kashyyyk is like, do you think that's going to look good on our records that we let this mistake happen on our watch and da-da-da-da-da? And it'd be better just to tell them to leave and they better not ever show their face in our space again. Otherwise, we'll blow them up or whatever. And so I do feel like, well, that's true. It will look bad for them. But I do feel like some tiny, tiny little part of Kashyyyk's heart didn't want to kill Janeway and did want her to go free on a personal level. Not because he had any feelings for the Bernali, but because, you know, him and Janeway made out. Something about that, just like the littlest bit of him didn't want to see her rot in prison for the rest of her life. I like to think that. But did he have even that much goodness in him? I don't know. In the end, though, Janeway's pretty sweet about it. She's just kind of like, my offer would have still stood. If you didn't double cross us, I still would have done everything in my power to offer you asylum. And he's like, oh, well, if it makes any difference, you really did tempt me. And nothing else ever has. So it's like a bittersweet episode. It's hard. It's kind of hard to watch because the Devore are the worst, but it's so good. And like when Grace mentioned a little earlier, this storyline of the Bernali comes back up in Voyager. And no lie, when Grace, I totally teared up in that scene. I was like, oh my gosh, the Bernali. Like, these are those, like, where are they nows that we never get. Well, thank you to Lower Decks and Prodigy. But before Lower Decks and Prodigy, and maybe a sampling of Picard moments, maybe, we haven't gotten where are they nows for like over 30 years, right? So I totally teared up on that episode that they brought that back, of all things, that they brought back this episode of Counterpoint. Okay, so I'm going to check the chat. And then we will hit the next villain on the list. Okay, Wingrace says, I love that Janeway plans for the worst and hopes for the best. That look at the end is just heartbreaking. Yeah, that scene where Kashyyyk is just like, haha, I got you. And she's like, oh, do you? I love that whole scene. And then when she's like, change the music, I just love the whole scene. And she's like, he said something. What does he say? He said, you deceived me or something. You tricked me or something. And she goes, well, isn't that the theme for the evening? It's just like, so, I don't know. I just love her delivery. It's perfection. Nadia says, yeah, Janeway has great instincts. She knew he was lying from the get-go. She just enjoyed the small moments when they came, knowing that the truth would come out, which is true. She was kind of like, well, I don't know if this is really good. It's exactly what you said, Wingrace. Like, she plans for the worst and hopes for the best. She was like, I'm going to just enjoy spending time with this man. And if he ends up being a liar, well, joke's going to be on him. But I sure hope not. Nadia says, Counterpoint is an awesome episode, which it really, really is. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, racism in the Delta Quadrants. Some races hate telepaths and some hate holograms. Yeah, and I would also say like racism in all the quadrants, right? Because if you watch any show, you're going to see stuff where you're like, what the heck? But yeah, this is one of those. So there's that. There's, right, like some races hate telepaths, some races hate holograms. And then this is going to be an honorable mention. But it was hard not to put it as a main one, which is the Krenim from the Year of Hell. The people who were just like blasting entire species out of existence with their time ship so they could restore their own power. I mean, I don't even know what you call that. Like, that's genocide on such a massive scale. And so it wasn't like any particular race or any particular, it wasn't like holograms. It was just like anybody who's inconvenient to our power structure. We just need to wipe them all out, their entire history, which is nuts. Yeah, Heretic says, yeah, I have a soft spot for this episode too, when Kajik is finally one-upped while the classical music is blaring on the bridge. Yes, classic moment. I love it when Janeway's like, computer, change music or whatever, and you're just like, she got you now. And then when they go like thing after thing after thing after thing, that they like unravel and he's just shown to be a total idiot. Glorious. Oh, yes. So, okay, Nadia says, true, but the writers clearly didn't think they made their point enough, so they ended up making Nazis a two-part episode so they could be as on the nose as possible, which is absolutely true. And then Best of Trek, Worst Trek says, I mean, every Trek has at least one Nazi episode, which is probably true. Oh, that was it, Heretic. Yes, you've created false readings. That was the line. You've created false readings. Isn't that the theme for the evening? Oh, so great. Okay. Next, villains on the list. This is number 5 on the list. And this is the telepathic pitcher plant. Speaking of telepaths, a space-dwelling organism has the ability to mesmerize the crew to believe that their deepest desires are coming true right before it eats them and their entire ship. 7 of 9, Naomi Wildman, the Doctor, and the Beast Hunter, what's his name? Katai, that's what it is. Katai. They work together to free the ship just in the nick of time. Another one of my favorite episodes. This comes from season 5, episode 14, Bliss. I love the episode Bliss. It's so interesting. It's kind of like, so Katai is like Captain Ahab, and this is his white whale, and there's this big monster that ate all of his people. Like, his people were on a ship looking for a new homeworld. So it was like the last of his people or whatever. And he was on a shuttle doing some other side mission, some side quest. And when he came back to his ship, the ship was gone because they were all eaten by this big monster. So then he's been chasing this monster for like 40 years or something, trying to kill it. But like, you can't kill it because it's been alive for millions of years and he has no idea how to kill it. So he'll just keep getting eaten by it and then trying to find its like brain area to blow it up. But because this creature can, cause you to hallucinate and misunderstand reality, Katai will think he's somewhere near the creature's brain, but really he's in the creature's digestive system and the creature's eating him. So basically it's just like a losing battle. But over the years, he's created some kind of resistance towards its effects, just enough for him to keep chasing it and fighting it, but not enough for him to actually kill it. And he's basically locked in battle with it forever because he's got to get revenge for his loved ones. And along the way, he tries to save other ships when he can, but like, he's not often that successful. Which we see in this episode. At one point, because the Doctor gets deactivated, because the Doctor knows what's up. So they deactivate the Doctor, 7 knows what's up. So the telepathic pitcher plant gets them to like put 7 into stasis so she doesn't figure it out. There's all these little clever tricks. But when Katai comes on board, they reactivate the Doctor, and the Doctor takes B'Elanna and injects her with this like stimulant, gives her like a hypospray and like a brain monitor or whatever, so that she'll come out of the delusion. And so, the Doctor's thinking like, she'll wake up, we can wake up the whole crew if we give them a powerful enough stimulant, and then they can help us get out of the creature's digestive system, because at this point, Voyager is being consumed. And so B'Elanna wakes up and doesn't see any of them. She's hallucinating while she's awake, and she's thinking that all her Maquis friends, who she just recently learned had all been slaughtered by the Cardassians, she is seeing them all alive. And she's like, what are you doing here? I can't believe you're alive. The letter said you were dead. Da, 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 da. And the Doctor's like, B'Elanna, like, wake up, hello. And then she just kind of passes back out, even with this really strong stimulant. And Katai is like, she doesn't want to wake up. She doesn't want to believe this is fake. They never do. So we find out that this has happened many times, that Katai has tried to save the day and it doesn't work. And he's just like, well, back to, trying to kill the creature. What I love about this villain is that it's also sneaky, right? These first 5, because this is 5 on the list, they're sneaky, but the difference though, unlike I would say the evil scientists who are pretty freaking callous, this creature is just trying to survive, right? It's just sneaky at survival. It's kind of like a lion going around killing and eating things, or waiting for the hyenas to kill it and then coming by and stealing it and eating it, whatever lions do. It's kind of like that. Like it's just getting nutrients. It's just eating. But the way it eats is very clever, which is interesting. I'm assuming it's not a very fast giant nebula monster, so it can't use anything like chasing something down and swallowing it. But also the thing about this like mind control that it does, which is so clever, is that whatever it's trying to eat kind of chooses to be eaten, right? It's like, okay, like it flies directly into its mouth. And then it just like, and then everybody just goes to sleep and it just eats them very quietly, right? There's no chasing them down. There's no phaser fights. There's none of that. It just lures them in. Like a lot of deep sea creatures do, using like different kinds of lights and stuff like that. Spiders do this. Lots of animals do this, where they have some kind of lure that brings their prey in so they don't have to go chase it down. And then once their prey gets close enough, there's some way to capture them and immobilize them and eat them. I thought that was really clever. I enjoy how they created a creature. So not just like, you know, the Kazon or something like that, but a creature that has lived for who knows how long, roaming around the galaxy, eating ships, you know, just eating ships left and right. But as soon as Voyager is free and Katai's ship is also thrown free, and his ship is like a piece of crap. It's like being held together by chewing gum and string. But as soon as they're both thrown free, Seven is like, come with us. We're going back to Earth, but you know, like it's better than hunting this monster forever. Maybe we could drop you off somewhere. And he's like, no, I'm good. Just send me back to my ship. And the doctor's like, have you seen that ship? Like that would be committing murder to send you back to that ship. And he's like, I'll be good. I'll be good. Just give me like a few little parts, replicate me some new coils or whatever. I'll install it on the way, but I got to go because the monster's already changing course. And they're like, all right. And the doctor's like, best of luck. And he gets on the transporter pad and he leaves and he goes back to hunt the beast. And the last episode is him. I don't even remember or the last scene. I don't remember what he's saying, but he's like, you know, he comes again upon it again. And he's like, haha, you know, there you are. And I don't know. This is just such a great villain. This is such a great villain. Because if it wasn't for 7 of 9, they absolutely would have been eaten. All of them. And maybe Naomi. Poor Naomi Wildman would have still been awake while everyone else was being eaten. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we will go to the next villain on the list. Okay, Nadia says, well, there you go. You can do a whole live stream episode or short video on the Nazi episodes throughout all of Star Trek. I could do that. But who wants to spend their time talking about Nazis? Not me. Not sure why Star Trek does either. I guess because it's something we can all comprehend, like how horrific it is. And it's something we can all put in perspective about how horrible it is for anyone to be like this. But I do prefer it when they're less on the nose, when you have to do like a little bit of a logical leap to be like, oh, this reminds me, as opposed to when they're so like blatant. Because that's maybe a little lazy writing. Not that there weren't great episodes though. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, is the pitcher plant really a villain or is it just feeding the best way it knows how? Yes. Yes, both. If I was being stalked by a predator on, you know, I was going to say on like in Safari Lands or whatever, but it doesn't have to be there. In the forest, in the ocean, in some natural place where I don't have human habitats and human weapons and, you know, human structures to keep me safe, that thing that is hunting me, I would perceive as the villain, though it would not, right? It would just be like, I'm just trying to get a meal. Yeah. Nadia says, exactly. It's cool to think of it as a villain, but it's truly more like the crystalline entity in TNG, which also is like a villain. Yeah. I agree. Crystalline entity is the best analogy. It is like the crystalline entity, which was also so cool. Oh my gosh. Crystalline entity was very, very cool. A giant killer snowflake. Yep, very cool also. But the difference though, I think people would probably be more like the crystalline entity as a bad guy than the pitcher plant, because the crystalline entity was like blasting the surface of planets, you know, and like ruining, you know, all the life was just dying and people were dissolving and all of this. But it's not so violent and scary with the pitcher plant. Everybody just kind of goes to sleep and then they just don't wake up again. It's a lot more gentle. DJ Knight says, saw that, which I'm guessing you meant saw that connection. Yeah, that was a good connection. I didn't see that until right now. Wingrave says, I love this episode. I also love that going back to Shattered, young Janeway is like the telepathic pitcher plant. The Delta Quadrant sounds like a death trap, which it was. As you remember the time when they turn into the cargo bay and it's like where Seven regenerates, but it's the time when they partnered with the Borg and like because Chakotay is trying not to tell Janeway too much about her future because temporal prime directive or whatever, and they open it and it's just Borg swarming around, and Janeway goes, I think you better fill me in. Episode was great. Nadia says, I wonder if the two giant spacefaring jellyfish from Encounter at Farpoint are out there eating things like the crystalline entity or the pitcher plant. What are those space jellies doing? We never got to where are they now with them either. They probably feel plenty of gratitude after a good space meal. Because real jellies eat like plankton and stuff. So I wonder what space jellies would eat. I don't know. Joy and gratitude. Yeah, I assume the jellyfish from Encounter at Farpoint are able to do that. Naomi, DJ Knight says Naomi is popular. Yeah, Naomi Wildman's so adorable. Loved her in Shattered also. Her and Icheb seeing like their big versions. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, oh, it's just so sweet. I really love that episode. Okay. Villain number 4 on the list are the Vidiians. Now, we first meet the Vidiians in season 1, episode 5, Phage, where Neelix's lungs are stolen. And we find out that the species suffers from a deadly disease called the phage. Kes ends up donating one of her lungs, and the thieves use their advanced technology to make sure that both her and Neelix are just fine in the end. In season 2, episode 19, Life Signs, the doctor treats a dying Vidiian woman, Dinara Pell, by transferring her consciousness into a holographic body. This is when we find out that not all Vidiians approve of the whole organ harvesting process. Because Dinara is like, I think it's horrible. I think it's awful. We shouldn't do this to people. Which we didn't know, because before this, all the Vidiians seemed to be on board with this whole let's harvest the organs train. She, at least not from living hosts, right? Because the original Vidiian says we usually try to go with corpses, but if we can't, then we have to go with live people. She proves to be a powerful ally because later she helps them with the antivirus that they give to Chakotay and Janeway so that they could be recovered from that ship that is from that planetary isolation episode, which what was the name of that episode? I don't remember the name of the episode. If you remember, put it in the chat. But I totally forgot that the reason why they were there was because of some Vidiian something. Anyways, Dinara Pell is the one who helped him with that. And we stopped seeing the Vidiians at some point. We do see them again in Coda, but like Coda is like a hallucination, flashback, time loopy episode. So it's not like, it's not real. And in that time loop episode, the Vidiians come and they like choke Janeway to death. They kill her. And she goes, wait, I thought we were out of the Vidiian space. So whatever the Vidiian space is, at some point they exit Vidiian space. And we do see them again in that episode, but that's just a hallucination. We do hear mention of them again in Think Tank, that the Think Tank actually found a cure for the Vidiian phage, which is like, they just kind of mention it in passing when they're talking about all of their feats and everything that they've done. They're like, oh yeah, we helped this kid find their missing pet and we helped blah, blah, blah. And we also helped cure the Vidiian phage. And you're like, what? So that makes me really want to Where Are They Now to see what they look like after this phage is cured, because we find out, I forget which, because there's a lot of episodes with the Vidiians. So I forget which episode, but in one of the episodes we find out, probably the first one that we see them, that they used to be a really advanced culture, similar to the Federation, but more advanced because their technology is way more advanced, where they were into art and culture and music and, you know, basically implying that they have gotten past that survival stage where it's not just food and shelter. They've gotten to a stage of self-actualization and self-expression and, you know, just helping the galaxy. And they're all scholars and artists and all these things. But when the phage hit, it kind of turned them back to this primordial version, or this primal version, I should say, where now it's all about survival. And so they're still trying to live their lives and do their thing. But at some point, and I think at some point they like explain the lore a bit more. At some point, the phage starts kicking in. So they're not born with it, but at some point, maybe like when they become adults, it starts kicking in, and then their organs start to fail, and then they need replacements and on and on. So they're really interesting villains. You know, the thing about the Vidiians too is like, if they didn't have this terrible disease, they wouldn't be out here killing people and stealing their organs. Like, They would have never thought of themselves as capable. And so it kind of gives us an image of what Starfleet could absolutely become if driven to these extremes, right? Like if there was this desperate need and everyone's going to die and all of this, that they could potentially be driven to these extremes. I could see the Federation becoming more like the Vidiians than like those evil scientists from Scientific Method, because they were just like cold and didn't care, versus these people where they're like, we have to do what we have to do to survive. But it's great to hear Dinar Pell and hear her say like, no, we don't need to survive. If we got to do that, we don't need to survive. Like that's doing too much. We need to find another way. Anyways, Vidiians, excellent villains. And they're, again, very multi-layered, right? There are episodes where you're like, I think it's the episode Deadlock, the one where Harry Kim and baby Naomi Wildman die. So sad. Yeah, that episode's really heartbreaking, actually. But in that episode, Voyager is like doubled, but it's occupying the same space. And the Vidiians board one of the ships, but not the other version. And so Janeway, in Janeway fashion, self-destructs her ship, the one that's full of Vidiians, and then the other ship gets to survive. And and Harry and baby Naomi Wildman go from the ship that gets destroyed to the new ship. So the one that makes it, the two of them that make it back to the Alpha Quadrant weren't technically the exact same two that were there before, but like, how different are they? And that was pretty scary because the Vidiians like swarmed the ship and just were like, just zapping people left and right and stealing organs. They're pretty terrifying. But also, I guess what makes them terrifying is they're very conscious of what they're doing. And maybe they feel a little bit bad about it, but they're still going to do it. They're absolutely going to do it. And like their phasers are also medical instruments that remove your lungs or whatever tissue at the same time as shooting you. So there's no hope of like, oh, maybe they'll just stun me and maybe I'll have a chance to escape. It's like, no, the second they shoot you is already too late. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then we will go to the next villain on the list. Oh, it's called Resolutions. Thanks. That episode, Resolutions. I like that episode. But I totally forgotten that the whole reason they were trapped there was the Vidiian thing, because I always just think about the Chakotay Janeway situation and I totally forget the context. When Grace says, Shattered Timeline is the best timeline if you're Icheb. Oh, poor Icheb. Yeah, Icheb's story takes a turn in Picard. If you haven't seen Picard yet, I don't know if you have to watch it, but it takes a turn. PS2 Chipper says the Vidiians are my favorite villains. I love that. Why are they your favorite villains? Wingrace says they are so much better than the Kazon. But let's be real, Wingrace. Isn't everybody? Aren't all the villains better than the Kazon? Except when Seska takes over the Kazon. Then they become like a Cardassian Kazon hybrid. And that's when I think they're kind of, they're pretty clever and formidable. But before that, they're just kind of annoying. PS2 Chipper says they are like rats trapped that turn carnivorous. Yes, that does describe the Vidiians really well. Even the good Vidiians are undermined by the bad ones. Yes, absolutely. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, I would love to know what the Vidiians are doing post-Voyager since Jason Alexander and friends cured them in Think Tank. I would also love to know what they're doing. My assumption would be if they don't have to struggle with this. Well, a couple things. One, let me keep this on the screen. One, if they no longer have this phage, okay, it's all cured. It's cured with all of them, and they paid some hefty price because the think tank is crazy. They paid some hefty price. Price is paid. The entire thing is cured. They don't have to worry about this anymore ever again. One, I think they would go back to doing what they were doing because they were still doing artistry and scholarship and all of these things while their parts were falling off. So I think they will go back to being the cultured society they were without worrying about their parts falling off. Two, I feel like a lot of alien species would have some beef against them because they've been going around harvesting organs for how long? I think they said this has been going on for, what do they say? Like 10 generations or something ridiculous, like a long time. So I feel like a lot of people would come after them. It's kind of like Q becoming human, right? It's like, well, now that the Vidiians are no longer a threat because they're not going to be out there in hordes trying to like zap us and steal our organs, maybe now we can get some payback. I feel like that's the second thing, is that somebody would want some, like a bunch of somebodies would want some payback against the Vidiians. But yes, I would love to see where are they now and just find out, like, did they try to make amends for all of the mass murder? Did they just move on with their lives and pretend like it never happened? Do the young kids know nothing about their past, so they just don't even know as they grow? I don't know. There's a lot of questions there. When Grace says they're all about cooking at the Klawakins Love Turk. Oh, not the Klawakins. Not the Klawakins. PS2 Chipper says, who did the Vidiians piss off? I don't know. Everyone would be my guess, because I don't think they were too choosy about the organs, because they could modify them to fit their bodies. Okay. Villain number 3 on the list are the Hirogen. We first see them in season 4, episode 15, Hunters. The crew gets several digital letters from home, but they come in on a Hirogen comm network, and the Hirogen don't approve of that. They capture Tuvok and Seven, and that's when we find out that they are hunters who torture their prey and then display their trophies. We see them in that Nazi episode we were just talking about. That's The Killing Game, season 4, episodes 18 and 19. The Hirogen take over Voyager and force the crew into violent holodeck simulations in order to kill them over and over. After the crew escapes, they come to an impasse, right? Because now they're kind of locked in this, Janeway-ism, like, get off our ship or we'll destroy everybody. And so Janeway offers a compromise to give them holodeck technology. And the head Hirogen, the reason why he did this whole holodeck thing and was killing them over and over in the first place was because he realizes the futility of their way of life. If they're going around hunting everything in the Delta Quadrant, they will eventually run out of things to hunt. And then their way of life will be ruined forever. So he's trying to think of, how can we continue our way of life without running out of the very thing we need to continue our way of life? And so he discovers these holodecks on Voyager, and he's like, cool, let's just keep killing these people over and over. And so Janeway's like, how about we give you holodeck technology so you can create holographic prey and you can continue your way of life. Like, you can continue to train in being warriors and hunters and all of that, which works until it doesn't. In season 7, episodes 9 and 10, Flesh and Blood, we find out that they use that technology to create a series of Alpha Quadrant species to hunt at will. But they also adjusted the program so that the holograms could feel pain, so that they could remember. So they could remember every single time they were murdered, so that they could learn. They basically made the holograms sentient so that the experience of hunting and killing was more realistic and more visceral. The holograms didn't take too kindly to that. So the holograms rebelled, and they escaped. They rebelled and they escaped, which is nuts. Like, this episode, that episode, Flesh and Blood, that 2-parter is amazing. Again, if you haven't seen it in a while, like, definitely watch it. But what's interesting about the Hirogen is they are absolutely villains, and they are a threat to all of Voyager. And clearly, I mean, they took over Voyager and forced everybody into all these crazy holodeck simulations to kill them over and over. So they were strong enough to take over the entire ship, like, easily. Probably just one of their ships was able to take over the entire ship. And so they are a huge threat, but they're also very, like, cognizant of what they're doing and why. So they enjoy hunting. Like, they like that process, but that's also part of their culture. That's part of their traditions. So it's a huge part of who they are. And in that sense, it's sort of not personal, similar to crystalline entity or the telepathic picture plant. In that sense of, like, we hunt, this is what we do, this is who we are. It's not personal. Like, they will hunt anything and everything. However, the way they hunt is extremely cruel. Like, it's awful. Like, that they were torturing. So when Tuvok and Seven got captured, the Hirogen who captured them was telling Tuvok about, like, all the ways he was going to torture him before he, like, melted his skin off his bones and then hung it up on his walls. And it's like, you don't need to do all that. You don't need to do all that. Like, if it's all about the hunt, you could just hunt. And if it's about souvenirs, you could kill something and take a souvenir, and that's it. You don't need to play with your food. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to torture something and drag out the anguish and pain. That's cruel. That has nothing to do with hunting. That has more to do with sadism than either the nutritional value of hunting, which is not why they're hunting, or the cultural value of hunting, which is like, look at me, I took on this big prey, and, like, that means I'm stronger than it or smarter than it or whatever it means about you. So in that sense, that makes them really dangerous, right? Because, like, they know exactly what they're doing. It's not personal in the sense that if you're in the room, they'll hunt you. But it is personal in the sense that they're going to, like, torture you and drag it out and make it as painful as possible for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So you just don't want to get caught by them. You really don't. In the episode Tunkatsuki, which I didn't talk about, a Hirogen gets captured, which is ironic. And he becomes a fighter in these, like, deathmatch pits. And 7 of 9 ends up being the person to fight him back, because the person who's leading all the matches likes to put in whoever he captures, he just go around kidnaps people and then throws them into the ring to like fight each other. And sometimes they fight to the death. Well, anyways, this Hirogen ends up training Seven on how to beat him because he's sick of fighting in this ring. He was captured like 20 years ago when he was on a hunt with his son. He doesn't know what happened to his son. It was either 20 or 25 years ago. So he's been fighting for like 20 years in this ring and he's sick and tired of it. And he wants to stop. And the only way to stop is to die. But he's a fighter, so he's not going to quit. So he trains Seven of Nine to beat him. And he's like, I want you to beat me. And if you don't, I will kill you. So don't get me wrong. Like, I will kill you if you don't kill me. And they fight almost to the death. But right before Seven does the death blow, Voyager finds them and beams them both out. And so they like land on the transporter pad with Seven of Nine over him, like about to do the double-fisted punch thing. And then they're like, Seven. And she's like, oh, hey, guys. And then later on, he asks her when they're like in sick bay recovering or whatever, he goes, would you have done it? Like, would you have put me out of my misery? And she's like, I don't know. Which is such a good ending. Like, it's such a good answer, right? Because she could have been like, no, of course not. Starfleet. Or she could have been like, yes, Borg, right? But she was like, I really don't know. In that moment, if they wouldn't have stopped me, I don't know what would have happened. So that whole episode gives us a picture into the fact that all Hirogen are not the same, that there's nuances to them as well. But I feel like Flesh and Blood shows us that the majority of first, I feel like the Killing Game shows us that like they pick Nazis as their favorite people. That's not good. But then later on, Flesh and Blood tells us that they're like torturing all the holograms. So they're not super redeemable. See you later, best of Trek, worst of Trek. So they're not super redeemable. So anyways, great villains. I'm going to check the chats and then I will check the chat and then we will go to the second to last villain on the list. PS2 Chipper says, I mean, who cursed the Vidiians? Yeah, they were not cursed. There was a plague, a virus that affected them like hundreds of years ago or something like that, out of the blue. And despite all of their advanced technology, they couldn't find any way to stop it. So I don't know. When Grace says the Durst family might want revenge, the Durst family. Who's the Durst family? Who's that? Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, one of Trek's best overall recurring villains, which is the Hirogen, they always feel menacing. Yeah, they are like some good bad guys, I have to say. PS2 Chipper says, that is the plot they used in Westworld. Oh, yeah! The suffering of the androids brought on sentience. Yes, you're right. You're totally right. That was the plot in Westworld, which was also a very traumatic show. Durst is the guy the Vidiians stole the face from. Oh gosh, you're right. Oh my gosh. When you said it, I saw it. And oh wow, I forgot about that scene because I didn't talk about that episode. That was the episode, I think it might be called Face of the Enemy or something like that. The one where the Vidiians capture B'Elanna and they split her into a Klingon version of B'Elanna and a human version of B'Elanna. I think it was that episode when they peeled off the guy's face. Ugh, gross. Okay, washing that out of my mind. Let's go to the second to last villain on the list, which are the Borg. We actually first see the Borg in Unity, where they are ex-drones. And then we see them again in Scorpion when they become temporary allies with Voyager. But I want to highlight a couple other episodes. So in season 5, episodes 15 and 16, Dark Frontier, Janeway leads an away mission to steal a transwarp coil from the Borg cube, and Seven is lured back into the collective by the Queen. She's forced to assimilate others and help create a bioweapon to destroy Earth, or she is threatened with being reassimilated. Now, the crew manages to rescue 7 of 9, and they do get 15 light years closer to home, so their gambit worked. Later on in season 6, episode 26, that's the last episode of season 6, and the first episode of season 7, Unimatrix 0, we find out another layer about the Borg backstory, which is that 7 of 9 discovers a hidden virtual sanctuary for regenerating Borg drones. Janeway tries to use this as a loophole to free those drones, but the Queen starts destroying all ships, even if they only have just one drone that she can no longer hear. She starts destroying ships left and right in retaliation. So then Janeway is like, okay, we gotta destroy Unimatrix 0. Otherwise, all these drones are going to die. But even though Unimatrix 0 is destroyed, those drones are able to regain their individuality when they come out of regeneration. And then a Borg civil war breaks out, And we don't really know what happens in that civil war, because by the time we see them again in season 7, episodes 25 and 26, in game, the series finale, we're not talking about the civil war anymore. So I guess that didn't do much. And in that episode, Admiral Janeway from the future travels back in time to help Voyager get home faster. She infects the Borg Queen and the entire collective with a neurolytic virus before the transwarp hub is completely destroyed. We also see that we see what's the very little that's left of the Borg Queen and of the collective in Picard. We see that in seasons 1 through 3. And I'm going to be doing a whole video about the Borg soon, so we'll get even more information about that. And whenever it's done, I'll link it here in this video, if I remember to do that. But the Borg are such a force. The Borg are always going to be a terrifying threat whenever they show up in Star Trek. They were first introduced in TNG. We met the Queen in First Contact, which is a TNG movie. And then we see the Queen in Voyager. We see the Queen in Picard. We see the Borg. We don't see the Borg in Deep Space Nine, unless you count the first episode, because Sisko's wife was killed at Wolf 359, which is when the Borg were trying to attack Earth, being led by Locutus of Borg, which is Picard. So Picard and Sisko have beef because of the Borg, but that's really the only Borg mentioned in Deep Space Nine. They're not really in Deep Space Nine. They're a lot in Voyager, and then we see them again in Picard, and then they do get temporary... what do you call it? They do in Picard. This is a little bit of a spoiler. The Borgs, so close your ears if you haven't seen Picard yet, but the Borg do get temporary, what do you call it? Addition, inclusion, or whatever into the Federation. So I don't know what the word is, but they do get like temporarily included in the Federation. And there is this like 1-minute clip that happens in Lower Decks that's in the far, far, far distant future. So like Discovery era or beyond, where there's a classroom and they're learning about the Boimler effect, and this teacher is teaching all these kids, like all these presumably Federation kids, about like different things to be aware of. And one of the things is she's teaching them about the Boimler effect, and you look into the little crowd of kids, and there's some little like Ferengi kids and like, you know, Earth human kids, but there's also a little Borg kid right in the front row taking notes with their augments and everything. So apparently, you know, the Borg do get totally like become a part of the Federation at some point, which is kind of cool. That's kind of a cool like ending to their story. But anyways, Borg, terrifying, always terrifying. They are a formidable villain for all the reasons we've said so far. They are, other than the Queen, who very much has a will, all the rest of them are just kind of doing their job. I mean, it's absolutely nothing personal. And they're only going to assimilate you if your technological or biological distinctiveness can be added to their own. If you can add something to them. There are plenty of times, like if you were walking around a cube or a sphere and you weren't any kind of threat, they wouldn't even try to assimilate you. They'd be like, whatever. You know what I mean? So they're a really interesting villain in that sense, where they seem really, really scary, but like only when you mess with them. You know what I mean? Like if you don't mess with them, they don't mess with you. But sometimes you get on their radar because you have warp drive, and that's a trigger that turns them on to try to attack you or something. You do something that brings their attention. If you remember the episode with Icheb's parents, I'm trying to think, I want to say Brunali, but I'm not really sure what race, what species Icheb is. But there's an episode with Icheb's parents where their planet is like on the edge of Borg space, and they faked a warp signature to bring the Borg towards them so that they could basically get Icheb assimilated, so they could infect the Borg with their genetic, with some genetic virus from Icheb to like disturb the entire collective or whatever. That's why they end up finding Icheb and a bunch of other kids disconnected from the hive. And so they use the fact that Borg are attracted to that sort of thing against the Borg. But anyways, all that to say is that they're a really formidable villain. No need to go into more detail than I already have. Just that they're also, what makes them scary is that they're not cruel. They're the opposite of the Hirogen. They're not cruel. They're not mean. They're just doing a job. They have no feelings about it whatsoever. Okay, I'm going to check the chat and then go to the top villain on the list and then some honorable mentions. When Grace, I just read the Durst family again and I'm just like, ugh. DJ Knight says, Borg Queen in her Borg dominatrix uniform. Let me tell you something. What if she had a Borg bullwhip? That Borg uniform, the Borg queen in that uniform is everything. It is so cool. First of all, the Borg look cool regardless, but the Borg queen, yes, like her whole, like with the, she looked amazing. I forget how long that makeup job took, but I think they said something like 12 hours or something crazy. Every time she did a scene, it was all day in makeup to get that look, but that look was everything. PS2 Chipper says, imagine if the backstory to the Vidiians is the phage was a way to save the species from the Borg. I know, huh? Because the Borg are like, we're good. They come in to assimilate and they see the phage is like tearing apart the Vidiians and all their skin is falling off. And the Borg are like, nah, we don't want to add that to our own. You go and keep that. We're gonna head back. That's funny. Nadia says, OMG, add Ichep's parents to the list. They are the worst villains. And DJ Knight says, oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, Ichep's parents are the worst. They are the freaking worst. That episode is so hard to watch because at the end, when Seven like gets Ichep back, because Ichep's parents do the same thing. Like as soon as he comes home, they're like, our son is home. Let me introduce you to your friends and your cousins and all this stuff. And then they're like, okay, Voyager, you can leave. You can leave. You've sent him home. You can leave. And Seven is like, I don't trust you people. Because how'd you lose him in the first place? You know, it's like, how do you have a Home Alone 2? How'd you leave your kid twice? You know? And Janeway's like, they're his parents. We can't keep him. Like, Seven, sorry, you got to let him go. As soon as Voyager is out of orbit, next thing you know, they've already drugged Icheb, put him on a ship, and did the whole thing again to try to attract another Borg cube. And it works. And Voyager manages to like scoop Icheb out and save him before the cube comes or whatever. Like as the cube is assimilating the little shuttle Icheb was on. And then when Icheb wakes up, Seven is feeling some kind of way because she was assimilated because her parents were scientists exploring. They were scientists studying the Borg who did something wrong. They made a mistake and then the Borg assimilated them. So Seven feels like her parents were irresponsible parents. They should have never put a child in the path of the Borg. She is correct. They should never have put a child in the path of the Borg. But anyways, so she's feeling like Icheb's parents are just like her parents. Like they were just careless. Come to find out, they weren't careless. They did this on purpose. They purposefully served him up to the Borg. They birthed this child so that they could serve him up to the Borg. This was their contribution to their community. They sacrificed their child for everybody else. And so when she's telling Icheb, she's like, it's okay for you to not forgive your parents, you know, like that's fine. Because clearly she hasn't forgiven hers. And Icheb is just like, well, I just hope that they'll forgive me. You're like, oh, you know, because he wants to also contribute to his community. He wants to help them. And if helping them means sacrificing himself, he wants to help. And Icheb is just so sweet. He just didn't get the ending he deserved. Icheb is such a sweetheart. Anyways, okay, now to the top villain on the list for the crew of Voyager. And that, of course, is none other than Species 8472. We first see them in the end of season 3, beginning of season 4, Scorpion. Species 8472 is a powerful enemy capable of defeating the Borg. They are waging war from fluidic space, which turns out was all started by the Borg in the first place. The Voyager crew creates a bioweapon against them, which forces them back into their space. And in exchange, the Borg give them safe passage through the Borg space so that they can keep going home. In season 5, episode 4, In the Flesh, the crew discovers a Starfleet Academy simulation created by Species 8472 to prepare them for the inevitable war against humanity. Based on what Janeway and crew did, Species 8472 is convinced that Starfleet is about to wage war on all of fluidic space. So they're preparing and they're doing recon and they're trying to figure out like, what is it like to be human? What's it like to be on Earth so that they can send their people to infiltrate the Academy. Janeway convinces their leader, which is a Boothby simulacrum, that Starfleet has no intention of fighting them. They don't want any bit of this fight. Also, Starfleet doesn't even know they exist because Janeway tells them, we have no communication with Starfleet. We don't talk to the people in Alpha Quadrant. We're trying to get back there. So they are not planning a war. We are not planning a war. We are not your enemy. And in fact, how about we give you all the data on that pathogen we sent you so that you can squash it or whatever. And in exchange, you give us some of your data on whatever the F. And so they end up exchanging data and Janeway's just like, we don't want to fight you. Like we were just trying to save our own skin. And thankfully, Species 8472 believes them and is like, all right, fine, cool, truce. So because I think this is like training camp 8 or something like that, because they've got these little training camps all over the place, and the training camps are little bubbles in the Delta Quadrant, because they have to train outside of fluidic space if they're going to infiltrate the Alpha Quadrant. So somehow Janeway manages to talk them off the ledge and say, hey, like, my bad. Like, yes, we did fight you guys, but like, that was a whole war situation and we're done with that now. We're not coming back for more. And they believe her. And that's good, because Starfleet could do nothing. Well, I guess, okay, I want to say Starfleet could do nothing against species 8472, but that's not true, because the Doctor was able to combat them. And if anybody can do anything against them, it's the Doctor. It is the Doctor. But if we lose Voyager, we're pretty much screwed. Okay, because I feel like nobody at the Daystrom Institute is as clever and resourceful as the Doctor. Okay, we need that one character to save all of the day. Maybe Beverly and Wesley working together could also come up with this, because they're pretty clever and they also save the day quite a bit. Apparently, there's way more information about species 8472 on Star Trek Online, which I have not played, and so I don't know any of this firsthand. But apparently, in that game, they build out the whole backstory. The alien species gets a name, and like, we know how tall they are and all kinds of things like that. But these villains are crazy. Like, there's a scene where there's like this derelict cube or whatever, and the Voyager crew, like, they go onto the cube to see what happened to it, and you just see all these Borg smashed into like this creepy Borg statue kind of a thing, where it's just like a face sticking out and an arm sticking out, and it's like, it looks like something took a bunch of Borg and like crumpled them and then like drove a spike through them. It's crazy. You're like, what the heck? And in the beginning, we think that there are these heartless aggressors that came out of fluidic space and just started tearing stuff up. But then we find out that the Borg started it. They started the whole thing. They went to fluidic space. They tried to assimilate something they couldn't chew, and then it fought back. And then they're like, oh, we need help. And it's like, yeah, now you see how everybody else feels, Borg. This is how everybody else feels. But because the Borg have no feelings, they also have no empathy. So I'm sure that lesson was lost upon them. And that allyship was very short-lived. Like, once Voyager got out of Borg space, they went back to being complete enemies. Someone said earlier in the chat, though, that the Borg are not as strong by the end of Voyager. Like, they're not as much of a threat as they were in TNG. And I think that's kind of true. Like, it kind of is and kind of isn't. Because, like, a lot of these things, like I've been just mentioning, they just get away. Like, with Icheb's ship, they pull that ship in with a tractor beam, but they let Voyager get away scot-free. And then we kind of find out that, like, oh, really, it's the Queen's behind all of it, because she sent Seven on purpose to do recon, and then she wanted Seven to come back to tell her what she learned. And I mean, it's a little convoluted, and I do feel like the teeth are taken out of the Borg a bit. They do seem a lot scarier in Endgame and a lot like harder to beat, but then Janeway beats them. So I don't know. I still think they're a pretty terrible, like a pretty scary villain, but they do get beat quite easily. I will say that, true. So I'm not really sure. Not really sure how to feel about that. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then I have some honorable mentions for best villains that did not make the official list, but they're just worth talking about. Oh, I forgot to say this. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks, PS2 Chipper. So DJ Knight says, okay, oh geez, I remember. I'm remembering these people. Nadia says, yay, 8472. PS2 Chipper says, that was pretty good CGI for the day. It really was. And it's pretty funny, because when I look back at it now, it's like not as good. But at the time, it was really cool. Like, had never seen anything like that. For sure, had never seen anything like that. And in rewatching it, what they do is, like, whenever the species 8472 comes out and like starts fighting or whatever, they do a lot of quick cuts. So that way it's happening so fast that your brain doesn't have time to process like how bad it looks. Even now, even with the HD and all of that, even with the 4K, you're like, oh, that doesn't look great. But because it's so fast and the action's so exciting, you're just like, it still works. It's very captivating. They did a spectacular job. DJ Knight says, I played Star Trek Voyager Elite Force on PC. Ooh, how was that? Was that fun? And then DJ Knight says, I have killed Borg on it. You know what? I have a Star Trek game on my virtual reality headset, and there's like different levels. One level's the Borg, one level's Klingons, and one level's something else. The Borg and the Klingons get me every time. Like, eventually they just send so many ships that there's nothing I can do, and I just get blown up. Either way, But the Borg are pretty scary because they give you a timeline for how long it's going to take for the Borg to calculate where you just ran off to find you and chase you. So if you go to this quadrant, a Borg will chase you, and then you go to a different quadrant. That Borg and the Borg from the first quadrant will both chase you, and then eventually you come to a point where like they're all bearing down on you, and you're just like, I don't think we're gonna make it. I've never been able to win at that game. Let's see. PS2 Chipper says the Borg have no emotions. If it's not worth the effort, they just back off, right? They're just kind of like, eh. They're kind of like in or out. Either way, not a big deal. So good. Okay, a couple of honorable mentions. That is, which I already mentioned, which was the Krenim. That's from the Year of Hell, the people who were just wiping out all life forms that did not help them become more powerful. And that was season 4, episodes 8 and 9, Year of Hell. And then the aliens who attack using hallucinations, which it was actually one alien roaming the ship, causing everyone on the ship to hallucinate, incapacitated almost everybody. And then Kes brought him down. And then when she brought him down, he just disappeared. And then everybody woke up. And so you're kind of like, is he gone? And that was from season 2, episode 8, Persistence of Vision. Really good episode. And at the end, when she like takes him down, because he like makes her think there's all these boils on her skin and all this stuff, and that like her skin's boiling, and she uses her telepathy or whatever to turn it back on him, and then his skin's all boiling and stuff. And then he turns to her and goes, "You're a powerful little thing, aren't you?" And then disappears. And I'm just like, yeah, Kes, get it. Let him know. Anyways, the aliens who attack in dreams, I think, are terrifying. That episode is season 4, episode 13, Waking Moments. And these aliens just wait for you to fall asleep. And then they just make it so you can never wake back up. And while you're asleep, they can create any kind of dream world. They can make it seem like you're still on Voyager doing your duty every day until your body eventually dies from lack of movement and nutrition, which is, again, super clever, super scary. And it would have worked even with the doctor, because the doctor, using the most powerful sedatives possible, couldn't keep people awake long enough, like, because the field that the aliens generated was so strong that even when he injected somebody, they fell back to sleep instantly. And the only reason why Chakotay was able to be successful is because he knows how to lucid dream. So he was able to figure out that he was dreaming, and then he woke up long enough to threaten all the aliens with an explosion if they didn't release their ship. But then when they released him, even before they released him, they were like, "Oh, go to this one point and you'll be past our planet, and then like the effects will rub off." But then they lied about it, and they still kept everybody. Basically, these people are Freddy Krueger, but less menacing. So they're really good bad guys because everybody has to sleep, right? And they live in dreams. So that makes them terrifying. Although in waking state, they're super frail and not a threat at all. And then I also want to mention Macrophage from season 3, episode 12, Macrocosm. Those are the giant viruses that were going around infecting everybody. Terrifying. Those are just some of the honorable mentions, but there's so many more, like the serial killing hologram from, oh gosh, what was the name of that episode? Oh, I'm blanking on it, but there's so many other Icheb's parents who suck. The crew of the Equinox from the episodes Equinox part 1 and 2. There's so many other bad guys, but that's all I have for you for now. Just so you know, we will not be live next week because I will be celebrating my birthday, but we'll be back the week after that, where we're going to talk about the best Q episodes in all of Star Trek. So if you go to the Sci-Fi channel, Sci-Fi Savage channel right now, you can go and drop your favorite episodes even before it goes live. And if you're watching on the replay, that episode's probably already ready, so you can just click over and watch that now. Thank you so much to everybody who was watching, who came live. Thank you to everybody who's on the replay. I so appreciate you. Thank you for the happy birthday. Guns out Janeway. That's hilarious. Yes, yes. Live long and prosper. Thank you for the birthday wishes. Okay, I'm going to end the live stream. This is so fun. You guys just give me life. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to see you next time. Night.